Hollywood taught you a lie. They showed you two men facing each other in the street, hands hovering over holsters, a crowd watching, a fair fight. The fastest draw wins. The loser falls clean. That almost never happened. The gunfight you've seen 1,000 times in movies? It was rare. So rare that when it did occur, newspapers across the country reported it like a circus act. Because the real duels of the Old West weren't about speed, they weren't about honor, and they certainly weren't fair. They were about one thing, making sure the other man didn't get a chance to shoot back. Most men who died in so-called duels never saw it coming. They were shot in the back, ambushed at night, caught unarmed, or killed by someone who'd been drinking for hours and had nothing left to lose. The fast draw, a Hollywood invention. The showdown at high noon, fiction. What actually happened was brutal, cowardly, and over in seconds. And if you survived, it wasn't because you were fast. It was because you shot first from cover and didn't give the other man a chance. This is the truth about Old West duels, and it's nothing like what you were told. Let's go back to the 1870s and 1880s, the peak years of the so-called Wild West. Towns like Dodge City, Tombstone, Abilene, places where law was thin and violence was common. But even there, formal duels were almost non-existent. Why? Because dueling had been illegal in most territories since the 1850s. It was seen as a relic of aristocratic Europe, something gentlemen did. And the West wasn't full of gentlemen. It was full of cattlemen, drifters, miners, gamblers, and men running from the law. Men who didn't have time for codes of honor. When disputes happened, they were settled fast. A man insulted you in a saloon. You didn't challenge him to meet at dawn. You pulled your revolver and shot him right there. Or you waited until he left and shot him in the street. The idea of two men standing 20 paces apart, turning and drawing, that came from dueling culture in the South before the Civil War. But even then, those duels used pistols at distance, not hip-drawn revolvers. The classic fast draw showdown you've seen in every Western? Historians can count the verified cases on one hand. One of the most famous was Wild Bill Hickok killing Davis Tutt in Springfield, Missouri in 1865. They faced each other in the town square. Hickok drew, fired once, and Tutt dropped. Newspapers called it a miracle. Because it was. Most gunfights weren't like that. They were ambushes, accidents, murders dressed up as self-defense, and the men who survived weren't heroes. They were the ones willing to shoot first and ask questions never. Here's what killed men in the Old West. Hesitation. You've been taught that the fastest draw won, but that's not how it worked. Revolvers in the 1870s and 1880s weren't like modern firearms. They were heavy, 6 pounds loaded, poorly balanced. The triggers were stiff. The sights were crude. Drawing fast meant nothing if you couldn't hit your target. And at 15 feet in the chaos of a real fight, most men missed. So what did the survivors do? They didn't draw fast. They drew deliberately. They took cover. They fired from behind a doorway, a horse, a wagon. They shot from across the street before the other man even knew a fight was happening. Take the Earp brothers at the OK Corral. That fight is remembered as a legendary gunfight, but it lasted 30 seconds. Most of the shots missed. The men were standing less than 10 feet apart, and they still missed. Virgil Earp was shot in the leg. Morgan Earp was hit in the shoulder. Doc Holliday grazed someone with a shotgun. It wasn't precision. It was panic. And here's the part history doesn't emphasize. The Earps had the element of surprise. They approached armed. The other side wasn't ready. That's why the Earps survived. The men who died in the West weren't slow. They were unprepared. They believed in fairness. They thought a fight would be announced. They thought they'd have time. They were wrong. John Wesley Hardin, one of the deadliest gunmen in history, killed over 20 men. Not one of those deaths was a fair duel. He shot men in saloons. He shot them in their sleep. He shot them while they were unarmed. That's what survival looked like. Here's what Hollywood never told you. Most gunfights in the Old West didn't involve outlaws. They involved ordinary men, drunk men, angry men, men who made one bad decision and died for it. In Dodge City between 1876 and 1885, there were 15 recorded deaths by gunfire. 15. In nearly 10 years. In a town Hollywood has portrayed as a battlefield. But here's the part they don't mention. Most of those deaths weren't duels. They were murders. Men shot in the back. Men killed over card games. Men who drew on a lawman and were killed instantly. The most common cause of death by firearm in frontier towns? Accidental discharge. Men shot themselves. Or their friends, because they carried loaded revolvers with no safety, often while drunk. The second most common? Ambush killings. A man with a grudge would wait outside a saloon at night and shoot his target as he stepped into the street. There was no honor in it, no ceremony, just a body in the dirt and a killer who disappeared into the darkness. And the famous gunfighters? The ones whose names you know? Most of them didn't die in gunfights. Wild Bill Hickok was shot in the back of the head while playing cards. He never drew his gun. Jesse James was shot in the back by a member of his own gang. Billy the Kid was shot in the dark by Pat Garrett, who was hiding in a bedroom. These men weren't beaten in fair fights. They were murdered, because in the real West, fairness got you killed. So what happened to the men who survived? They didn't ride off into the sunset. They lived with the weight of what they'd done. Wyatt Earp spent the rest of his life defending the shootout at the OK. Corral. He was charged with murder. He fled Arizona. He drifted from town to town, working as a gambler and a guard until he died in Los Angeles in 1929 at the age of 80. He wasn't a hero. He was a man who killed 3 people in a 30-second gunfight and spent 50 years trying to justify it. Doc Holliday died of tuberculosis 6 years after the OK Corral. He was 36 years old. He spent his final years in a sanatorium, coughing blood, alone. John Wesley Hardin spent 17 years in prison. When he was released, he tried to practice law. He was shot in the back in a saloon in El Paso in 1895. He died the same way most of his victims had. The men who lived through gunfights didn't become legends. They became drunks, drifters, haunted men who couldn't hold jobs or stay in one place. Because killing someone, even in self-defense, changes you. The frontier didn't reward violence. It consumed violent men. And the ones who survived long enough to tell their stories? They lied. They exaggerated. They turned murders into heroic duels because that's what people wanted to hear. But the truth is in the records, in the coroner's reports, in the newspaper accounts written the day after. Most gunfights were over in seconds. Most men died without ever drawing their weapon. And survival had nothing to do with skill. It had to do with who was willing to shoot first. The Old West wasn't a place of honored duels and noble gunfighters. It was a place where men killed each other over insults, debts, and drunken arguments, where the fastest draw didn't matter because most men never got the chance to draw at all. Hollywood gave you heroes. History gives you something else. It gives you men who survived not because they were fast, but because they were ruthless. Men who shot first, from cover, without warning. Men who lived with the consequences until the day they died. The showdown at high noon? It never happened. The fair fight? It was a fantasy. And the gunfighters you've heard about? Most of them were shot in the back. That's the truth about Old West duels. And it's a truth that was buried for over a century. Because the real West wasn't a legend. It was a graveyard.